People are slowing down on coming in, so we'll go ahead and get started. So like I said, we're going to go over a little update on Prolent tonight and how that page is going to work and how you're going to submit things. And we'll also do another check-in on your customer interviews, and then review a little bit of material from previous workshops. And then we'll talk about revenue streams, which is how you're going to make money doing what you're doing. So I updated the workshop schedule on the Prolent page. Everything should be up to date as like with what we're actually doing in the workshops with the links. The last workshop, which is the how to pitch workshop, actually has a different link than the rest of them. So just keep that in mind. It's not the same link that we've been using. That's kind of end of March. I think March 24th is that one. So just keep that in mind. So all of the rounds have been updated. When you went in Prolent before, it was a little confusing because there was initially a registration deadline of November 1st, and the way that it was in the system made it seem like you needed to submit something by that date. And then I moved it to January 31st, but now that the round that we're in now, we're considering the preliminary round, which is just the workshops. The first round will open on March 17th, and you have to have everything submitted by 11:59 p.m. on March 19th. So the submission forms are up, they're live now, but they're hidden until that March 17th date, just so you don't go in there submitting stuff until we've given you the exact like instructions on what we want to see. There's also a place on Prolent for the criteria and prizes, which will make that information public soon so that you know the criteria, especially for semifinals, that we're looking for. So you know you have all the right things in your presentation that will fit those criteria. So just to review the timeline. So like I said, March 19th is the first time something is due, and that will be submitted via the Prolent round 1 form. So you'll be submitting your, short 3 to 5 minute video talking about your customer discovery journey, the interviews you've done, what you've learned from those, and then also your initial and current business model canvas. So it'll just be a form where you'll upload the files for each of those. For the video, you'll need to host it on YouTube or Vimeo, something you'll be able to provide a link there. In between round 1 and round 2 will be the how to pitch workshop, which is an extremely helpful workshop, especially if you've not done any pitches or done any pitches virtually. Sarah, who's with When You Leave the Room, will be conducting that workshop. And last year she was able to kind of last minute teach, kind of give some tips and tricks on pitching virtually, which is a little bit different than if you were to be pitching in person. So I highly recommend attending that one. It will be extremely helpful. And I know a lot of the tips that she's given in those workshops, we've used her company for various different programs that we do. And the people who implement the tips that she gives end up doing very well, and not only our competition, but other competition that I have seen them be in. So highly recommend attending that. It'll be really helpful to you in this competition especially. And then March 31st will be our live round 2, which is a feedback session with judges. So prior to March 31st, you will need to have submitted materials via another Prolent form, which will be the round 2 form. And that's just collecting your executive summary, and which in another workshop we'll go over a template for that and tell you what we're looking for in that. And then you'll also be expected on the 31st, which is a Wednesday. We're not sure of the time yet, but we're thinking probably later afternoon, 3 to 5 p.m. You'll be expected to participate in a feedback session with the judges, who will likely be the same judges that are the semifinal judges. So this is your opportunity to get feedback from them on not only your pitch, but your idea itself. And you definitely want to really take the judges' feedback seriously and implement it before your semifinals submission, because like I said, they're likely to be the same people, so they'll be looking to see if you incorporated any of their feedback. And then in between round 2 and the semifinal round, there's an option for you to have a practice pitch with us. So that would be a good time if you got feedback from the judges that you wanted to incorporate into your pitch. It'd be a good time to kind of try it out on us and see where you're at that point. And that'll give you a little bit more time to make additional edits before the semifinals are due. So those are an optional thing. They're not considered an actual round. So we'll have a Calendly where you can sign up for a time slot to pitch to us. So that will be coming later. And then the semifinals and finals will actually happen on the same day, virtually on April 14th. However, for the semifinals, the pre-material submission will need to be in by April 9th. That's just because we have to be able to send out your 10-minute recorded pitch presentation to judges to review prior to the semifinal showcase, just because they won't have enough time to really go around and talk to everybody in detail and see the pitch and then ask questions. So this is just to make sure they've seen your pitch before the day, and they can change their judging based on talking to you on the 14th, but they will have already seen your materials. And then we'll also need a 30-second kind of quick video saying, this is who we are, this is what we're working on. You can find us in booth number, or we're not sure how it's going to look. You might say, our booth is at the bottom of the page, scroll down to see us. And this will be playing with everybody else's on loop on our main stage, just so when the judges come into the room, they know to go find you down in a virtual booth. You'll also submit your exec summary and business model canvas then as well. So then on the actual day of the 14th in the morning, you'll be in a virtual booth, which is basically a Zoom meeting inside of another large Zoom meeting. So it'll be set up in the way that we have a main stage, and then a bunch of booths, so like 40 or so booths for all of the teams participating. You'll have your exec summary, canvas, and a short, your pitch posted in the room. And you'll also be there to answer questions from judges coming in. So they might come in and just type their questions in a chat, or they might hop into the Zoom call with you and just want to have a conversation that way. And that's their way of being able to find out more, ask the questions that they had when they watched your pitches. And then from the judges that submit their scores based on watching your pitches and talking to you during the virtual showcase, we will select 5 finalists who will pitch that afternoon. So everyone needs to have a final pitch deck ready to go, because you won't find out until kind of 10 minutes before probably that you're going to be pitching in the finals. So you need to be prepared as though you are pitching in the finals, so that when we call you, you're ready to do so. Does anybody have any questions about that before I move
on? Yes, I do have a question. So you say during the pitch, it's going to be a 10-minute recorded one. So it's not necessarily going to be like in a Zoom meeting with the judges at the same time, giving them like my pitch on how it is. So it's just like they're going to watch it and then I'm going to wait for the feedback, right?
Well, you will submit the recorded one. So you're not going to be giving a pitch and then having questions be asked of you, but live on the 14th, you'll be in a Zoom meeting waiting for judges to come around and ask you more questions. So they will have already seen your recorded pitch, so you don't need to give your entire pitch over again, but they'll ask you kind of more in-depth questions.
Okay. And my second question is, how many ideas or business models have been submitted? Just so I know how tough the competition is.
Well, it's kind of hard to tell. Not everybody who is going to end up submitting for like the semifinals have been participating in the workshops. But from what's registered and what we expect, there will probably be at least 30 other teams, 35 other teams. So yeah,
Okay.
we don't plan to cut anyone with rounds 1 and 2. Those are more check-ins, make sure you are where you're supposed to be, that you've done customer interviews, things like that. The semifinals to finals will be where there's a big cut made, from like 30 some teams down to 5.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. All right, so I wanted to do another check-in, and not just on like your customer interviews. I will launch that same poll again just to find out if you've done any more since the last workshop, kind of where we're at on that. But also, if you've had any, good insights from your customer interviews, feel free to either type in the chat what those have been or unmute yourself and share with us. Or if there's anything that came up in your customer interviews that was like weird and you don't know how to handle it, as far as should I pivot? How do I deal with this? Also feel free to just unmute and get feedback in general from both myself and Arnold.
Say one feature that kind of came up that I didn't think about was so my app is this parking marketplace for people, for example, to sell parking in their driveways for events like football games. So as I was interviewing some people, the idea came up that some people would like to maybe even rent like a front yard for tailgating maybe. So that was kind of a extra feature I never really thought about. That kind of works with football games, I guess.
Yeah, because especially like at Purdue, I think a lot of what was usually used for tailgating isn't anymore. So people probably are like, where do we go to tailgate? Interesting. All right, so it looks like only 3 people have done more than 25 interviews. So just to let you know, one of the biggest criteria in the judging for semifinals is that you've done lots of quality customer interviews, and we expect to have 100 or more. I think I mentioned in previous workshops that past winners like Glimpse and Narava have done 150 or more interviews. So if you haven't done more than 25 at this point, I would really try to ramp that up. And I know it's probably hard getting people to respond and actually schedule a call with you, but the more you reach out, the more people will end up, following through and having an interview with you. So has anybody had like specific issues with being able to get interviews, or do you not know, who to reach out to? Kind of where are you at with that?
I do have like a few things to talk about, because like with our idea we have two sides. There's like a demand and a supply side, so we are trying to juggle between those two, because with the demand side we feel like there's like a mass consensus that like we need the product, but like with the supply side it's very hard to sit in, because these are like uh organization precedents, which so it's relatively harder to get in. These are usually either our friends or like friends of friends who are presidents of clubs. So that's been a bit hard, but like the good thing is that we are getting similar responses. So whereas I do not want to generalize like their responses as to be like, okay, I mean, this is a valid problem. So that is one thing, because like the supply side is relatively more important to our business, because that's where our monthly revenue would be coming from. So that is one problem that we face. So how do we go about it, if you have a suggestion for it?
Can you remind, I know I just had an office hours with you, so I remember what your idea is, but like for Arnold's sake, if you could remind us what you're
Sure,
working.
sure. So our company is called Canary, and like we are trying to like eliminate how, we're trying to concisely inform students where what is happening on colleges. Because I again, I take this example with Emily, I guess, which, like, I'm not a woman and I'm not an engineer, but still I get women in engineering emails from like Purdue. So how do we get the information to the right people, and then they can act on it based off of their interests? So basically the reach for clubs and students are like, more than it is right now, because we're stuck on flyers. Whereas like the with COVID and everything, it's harder and harder to get people around, as we are discussing. So yeah, I mean, so that's the idea. And like, I mean, we were trying to interview like club presidents on, like, how much would they value this new visibility that they would get on college campuses. So that's that.
So I have a couple thoughts. One is, if you go into Purdue Boiler Link,
Yes, sir.
there are over 1,000 clubs registered,
Yeah.
and they have the contact information for either the academic advisor and or the e-board
Mhm.
there.
Mhm.
So there's 1,000 emails you can send out, right? Even at a 10% hit rate, you're talking 100 already. But I wouldn't necessarily limit it to just the presidents, because I think now you're talking a lot fewer people, and the presidents are probably very busy. So if they have opportunity or people listed in other executive roles, you could interview them as well. So maybe it's not the president, maybe it's the vice president,
Right.
or an executive director or membership director.
Mhm.
So now you have, instead of 1,000 opportunities, you actually have 3,000 or 4,000 opportunities, because now there are multiple people in every club.
Right. Right. Uh, I completely concur to that, honestly, because the biggest thing with Boiler Link is like how convoluted it has. But like, I mean that's a great idea to just begin with, and like, structure it that way to go around and conduct interviews. And so yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
The other thought is, depending on how big your group is,
Mhm.
and I don't know where things are in terms of clubs holding call outs and whatnot,
Mhm.
but so it used to be, in January, they have like the spring call outs for all these clubs. Like if you walk around campus, you see the chalkboards, you see the flyers.
Sir.
And if you're having trouble, like, go to a call out,
Mhm.
go to the end of a call out and say, hey, I'm looking for the president, who will probably be there, and say,
Right.
hey, can I get 10 minutes to ask you a few questions? And at that point, you can interview the whole team that's there.
I guess so. Yeah. 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 That's a good idea. Yeah.
You got to hustle.
Yeah. Yes, sir. I got it. Thank you.
So for me, I think it's been a bit difficult getting interviews, because I find it hard to explain the business idea without necessarily compromising too much information on how it works.
I think like you don't really have to go into detail about how it works. If you're asking questions just to get to what problem it is that your customer is facing and what they're currently doing to solve that problem, you don't really want to even talk too much about what it is that you're doing anyway. So I don't think that that's much of a concern if you're asking the right questions, basically.
Yeah, I think I've been getting a lot of, questions from the customers, like, how does it work? How do I benefit? So then that's when you have to like really give them a detail for them to actually see it as something that they would be able to use or utilize in the future for their business needs.
So Nancy, can you remind us what you're trying to do, or what problem you think you're trying to solve?
So in general, I'm trying to I'm trying to bridge the gap between customers and businesses in a much better format than what is already in the market. Like, for instance, what Yelp is offering businesses. And Yelp is technically only in the US and I think in Ireland. So I wanted to have text list be global, just the way Airbnb is global for renters. But this one is mainly for businesses only, where we are basically more inclined into reviews from customers.
I did not follow that.
So text list is
How is this different from like Angie's List, for example? Because that's kind of what it reminds me of when you're talking about it, is like kind of more detailed information about what the business is really like versus just, you know.
right. So the main difference between the two is text list is more subscription based than clicks or view based. And we are trying to have each business have their own listing such that they really don't need to have a website on the side for them to incur the like maintenance cost or web design cost. So yeah, trying to basically help them acquire more customers in that sense, rather than, you know, having a platform where they kind of like have to it's kind of like a bit difficult to explain it, like how it works, but it's more of just
Now think of
trying
it this way, we don't need to know how it works. What you need to help explain to me is what problem you're solving.
so I'm solving the go ahead.
I was gonna say, so is your customer a business or a consumer?
Both, but mainly for businesses to be
Okay, so
able to
I'm a business. I'm a business. So what problem are you solving for me?
giving you visibility to probable customers.
And why do I have that problem today?
You have the problem today because maybe you cannot be able to afford a website to maintain, so you'd rather have your business listed in ours rather than you having your own website.
Okay. So the problem is that I'm a business and I can't afford a website?
Technically, yes. So instead of you having your own website, you could just list your business on our site and be visible that way.
But what do you mean be visible?
So from the research I've done, thus far, most businesses, like for instance, the small businesses, they're not able to afford to have a website. So most of them tend to go to list their businesses in, let's say, Facebook or Instagram. But then with Facebook and Instagram, it's very hard for a customer to just go on Facebook and be able to find a business there. But text list is more like the website where you go and everything is there, and it's all businesses or service providers. And you don't need to like log in as a customer for you to be able to view businesses. All you have to do is to type your location, or the business name or the category, and be able to see based on your location, rather than going on Facebook or going on Instagram.
Okay, I kind of see it. So for you then, you need to be interviewing small businesses.
Is that the interviews that you've done so far? The small businesses?
Yeah, so far it's been small businesses, but interesting enough, I've seen a surge of registrations in the website from big businesses. So it's kind of like something interesting so far.
To get customer interviews with the small businesses, have you tried just like literally going in to if they have a physical location tried going in or finding those small businesses like on Facebook, just in the kind of regional area at least?
Not necessarily, but I went ahead to just see what businesses are complaining about in terms of our competitors, which is, for instance, Yelp or Angie's List or Home Advisor. And most of them are complaining about the reviews. So if you have good reviews, then you find that Angie's List will probably block the good reviews, so you can pay like thousands of dollars for them to be visible. But for us, we're trying to make it more open. So it's more like we verify the reviews and we make sure that they are always available for any customer to see them. So we are not blocking them so that they can just keep paying us more money and, not necessarily having or being able to actually benefit from customers seeing the good reviews. So we are not blocking any reviews from potential customers.
Right, so my advice would be is if you're interviewing small businesses, you kind of want to first start and go very generic and say, hey, if you're a small business, if you go into someplace on Chauncey, what are the 3 biggest problems you have as a small business? And I have a feeling that website presence or the cost of the website's not in their top 5 or even their top 10. And so I worry that while it potentially could be a problem, it's so far down their list that you're going to have a hard time getting traction. And so then even if you have a great product, that again, they're not going to have time to deal with it because it's just not in their top 3 or 4, right? I mean, the biggest things that they're worried about are the ones that they're going to spend their time on. You kind of know what, you understand what I mean?
Yes, I get it.
So it's identifying, a problem that the small businesses, is really painful for them.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if you interview them and say, hey, like paying whatever they pay, $100 a month or $50 a month to maintain this website is really difficult, then you might have something. But again, this is where you need to do the interviews to collect that data.
Okay.
And I would agree with Emily is that if you're having trouble getting interviews, if you're comfortable going to restaurants, late morning, mid-afternoon, when they're pretty quiet, and just saying, hey, can I speak with the manager for 15 minutes?
Sure.
And the big one is just say, hey, I'm a student at Purdue. I'm doing research on small businesses. Do you have time to answer a few questions?
Sounds
right?
good.
Not the, hey, I can improve your web presence. And then they start asking, how do you do that? What's my benefit? Right? You don't want to you're not doing a sales pitch. You're doing exploratory interviews just to find out what their problems are.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Anybody else looking for feedback just on their idea in general, or any problems they've been encountering the last few months with customer interviews or anything else? All right, so we will move on here. So questions about the last workshop that we did that was on market research. So we had Annette from libraries here talking about all of the resources available. Did anybody try getting into the databases? Did you find anything cool or surprising, or did you not find anything helpful, like you couldn't figure out the right keywords to be searching, anything like that? I think with the parking one, I saw come into the BMC email box that you're kind of having a little bit of trouble. You want to talk that through?
Yeah, so I think it was Ibis World had really good data on like like the parking industry as far as garages go and like the big players in that field, I couldn't find any good research on like how much of parking transactions are digital now or through an app. And then the other thing I really couldn't find is like event-based parking. And I mean, part of my thing is a lot of the event-based parking is, for the most part, a lot of small operators and a lot of cash-based transactions. So maybe it's just an industry that people aren't tracking. So like the way I've been, I could come up with very rough numbers of what I think the size of that market is, but it's been hard to find anything concrete.
Yeah, because some are just like, people in the Insomnia parking lot selling parking for $20 cash, and
exactly,
you may not see that in a market report anywhere.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I think makes it hard to quantify with the typical sort of industry reports. I was hoping I could find the digital, like that seemed like something somebody should track. I haven't found it yet.
So it's good and bad, right? It's bad because you can't find the info, but if it also doesn't exist, that means you might be onto something, in the sense that you're in a space that a whole lot of people aren't already doing research reports on, right? Because that also typically means, if there are research reports that exist, that it's an established industry and the trends and all that kind of stuff. Yours is a tough one, but if, like, Annette is very open, again, if you go to her website and just booking a short appointment with her, then she's always open to helping. And since she kind of worked through it a little bit at the last workshop, but just say, hey, I'm trying to find these two things. Sure, she might be able to, like the digital one, like you said, that one might be out there and she would probably know the right keywords. So I'd recommend reaching out to her. And the thing I was thinking about was, it's very unfortunate that Purdue isn't allowing any events, because otherwise I would say at the next football or basketball game, you stand outside, you walk the neighborhood and you can almost just count up how many people are selling spots on their lawns.
I actually did that at a Colts game, and it's like, I mean, even though the capacity is so low to what it typically is, like whole streets are just lined up with $20 park here.
Yeah. So it's one of those, and I also think that, like we were saying earlier, if you do a bottoms up and say, okay, in any given rural, like West Lafayette, if you counted the number of houses, again, remember we talked about with Annette, and just say, okay, there are roughly 5,000 driveways within a half mile of the stadium. Because I get a sense that people would be against, okay, not everyone's going to hold out a sign for $20 for if they can only fit one or two cars on their driveway, but like an Airbnb or whatnot, if I could just list it on my phone, then maybe I'll do it.
Yeah, I think that's my sort of pitch to them is very low effort on their part to generate that revenue.
Yeah.
So you might just have to do a little math. Instead of being able to find the number, do what Arnold said, like a bottoms up approach. Just count the number of driveways, ticket times $20, per spot.
What I don't know is how you can interview somebody. How do you get interviews with people who have driveways near stadiums?
So I was actually just gonna go to the houses by Ross.
Knock on the door?
Just knock on all the doors, and I would probably get some people to talk to me. It was
okay. If you're comfortable with that, right? That is a great. I mean, it's close density, and
Or if people aren't home, you could like make up like tiny little flyers that you just kind of put in the door. Like, they may not call you, but you could try. I've had people before just stick things in my door, and they were probably trying to do a similar thing. So.
Gotcha.
Anybody else have issues with their bubble chart or finding pertinent information to them?
I had one more question about that bubble chart. Is that typically like revenue or profits that those numbers are based on?
It's top line revenue.
top line revenue.
So it's how much you could totally make. So it doesn't include costs and whatnot, but just how big the market is or the buying potential of that market.
And in my case, since it's a marketplace and it's commissions, it would be calculated based on my commissions, or would it be the actual transaction? Because since my revenue is the commission.
Yeah, so for yours, let's see. Technically, it would be the commissions. Nancy, did you have a question? It looked like you were about to unmute.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I think in regards to his question too, so for my business idea, I have the numbers of, like, let's say the population in a certain geographical location. So let's say for the US, we have roughly 375 million people. In Africa, we have 1.2 billion, roughly, right? So in those two markets, I was kind of like finding it difficult to be able to come up with a bubble chart for how much revenue am I expecting to get from those two different markets, and also how do I present those two different markets to kind of show, how much I'll be like to quantify the two. And then also at the same time, the business model is subscription based. How do I go with coming up with a much better numbers?
So in your model, who pays you, the business or the consumer or both?
The business.
Okay, so when I asked you the question earlier of who your customer is who pays you. So your business,
yes,
the businesses are your customers, but you have, I'll say, regular people as your users.
Yes.
You understand the difference?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So for you want to know how many small, like for you, the population is not relevant.
Okay.
You need to know how many, like again, your target customer is small businesses. So how many small businesses are there in the US? How many small businesses are there in Africa?
Okay.
And maybe because you said yours is sort of a substitute for web services.
Correct.
You could figure out, well, how much do small businesses in the US spend on websites each year?
Okay.
Because what you're saying is like, either, because what I don't know is what percentage of small businesses actually have a web presence.
Mm-hmm.
So there are two things I'm thinking of. One is, let's say most of them have a web presence. Then either you're saying, okay, the group that I'm either targeting the group that doesn't, or I'm targeting the group that does but can't or is having trouble affording it. And so then you might be able to say the amount spent on IT services or web services for small businesses, and you can imagine, okay, there are 100 million small businesses, they spend $500 a year on websites. So the size of because that's part of what you're going for. So your actually total market could be $1 billion, because that's how many small businesses times how much they spend. You're going after, again, small businesses, particularly geographic, something like that.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Does that help?
Yeah, it does help a little bit.
Yeah, I think you want to look for like the numbers of like what you're replacing, like what they're currently doing, like, so you want to look for that, because it's going to be harder to find numbers otherwise if you're not looking at what are they either not doing or doing in replace of using my thing, and that's how much money you could make off of it basically.
And is it reasonable to compare the market share based on what Yelp or Angie's List is kind of generating per year?
Yeah, I would say like those are your competitors.
Right.
What you would be replacing. So I think when you're looking at market reports, you would want to search like Angie's List and see what kind of reports they're showing up in.
Okay. Sounds good.
But I mean, we'll get to the marketing part in next week's or 2 weeks lectures. But what you don't want to do is say, this is a $10 billion market. If I get 1% of the market, I have a $100 million business. You absolutely do not want to say that.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Anybody else have issues with their market research? Did anybody find anything really cool, good, surprising? I can't see anybody's faces, so I don't know if you're paying attention to me or not. All right, so now we will actually talk about this week's topic, which is revenue streams and how you're going to make money. So then we'll talk a little bit about cost structure. So these are the bottom 2 boxes on the business model canvas. So from this workshop today, you should be able to define those bottom 2 boxes a little bit more. So these are the kinds of questions that you need to be asking, and this is good information you can get from your customer interviews that you're doing in order to determine what your optimum revenue model is going to be. So for what value are our customers really willing to pay? So what is the benefit that you're providing that people will actually pay money for? And for that problem that they're having that you're trying to solve, what are they currently paying for? So if they're paying for your direct competitors doing the same thing that you're trying to do, but you're trying to do it better, are they paying for that? And how much do they currently pay? Or are they paying for something else that isn't really solving their needs and isn't really what you're doing, but it's the way they're currently trying to solve their problem? So for what do they currently pay and how much are they currently paying? You also want to find out how are they currently paying. So are they paying like subscription-based one-time fee? And is that the way that they would prefer to pay? So when you're talking to your customers, this is information you want to find out. Are you currently using another solution to solve this problem? How much are you paying and how do you pay for that? And are you happy with paying for it that way, or would you prefer to do it another way? So once you've asked those questions, you can kind of get a good idea of how they're currently doing it and if that's working, and if it's not working, that you need to do it a different way. So there's a few different kinds of revenue models. So we'll just start at the top and give a few examples of each. So a platform is something, I'm sure most of you are aware, but it connects basically 2 groups of people. So for Uber, it's people who have a car are being connected to people who don't and who need a ride somewhere. Airbnb is, people who have houses somewhere and someone's coming in, staying for a short time, and they just need a place to stay. So that would be a platform. And Glimpse, that we've talked about a few times, who won the competition last year, they're another example of a platform model. Direct sales, that's like when you have, salespeople, either you're selling yourself or you employ salespeople to get to your customers. And Presso is an example of that. Arnold can give a little more information about how their revenue model works.
Yeah, so Presso is a really cool concept. What they started with was a very quick kind of do-it-yourself dry cleaning machine. And so it's, just this box, kind of 3 or 4 feet tall. And basically the idea was you hang a shirt in there or you hang a jacket in there. you close it up, you put in your dollar, and then in 3 minutes, it launders and dry cleans your item. And so they have a really interesting, actually, customer discovery process as well, because when they were first founded, the founder first said, these would be great in apartments. College students, every once in a while they need something laundered. Why not put one of these units in the laundry room? And so then, the apartment complexes can do that. But he was having a lot of traction issues, and it's actually because the volume wasn't necessarily high enough. Because what they were trying to do is, okay, if you do it, how many transactions do I get? And so it was a little bit of kind of like maybe like the platform, but that's not really the right one. But if someone just pays $1 to do it, and then maintaining the units and all that kind of stuff, and he's like, well, maybe that's not the right market. What if I go to hotels? People who travel, same thing. They may need an item laundered or whatnot. You got a whole hotel. Maybe they can put one of these in there, but it ended up being the same thing. They recently raised a round, and they ultimately found their target market was the movie industry. So what happens is the movie industry, as you can imagine, it costs millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars to shoot these movies. And one issue they have is with the costumes. And so what they have to do is, for any actor, they need to buy 3, 4, 5 costumes, because if they do one shoot one day, then they got to clean it. So then it's like, but they can't hold up the shooting schedule, so they buy another one. And you can imagine if there was a scene where someone was throwing water on it, if that didn't work, then they got to switch outfits and whatnot. And so they don't know how many outfits they need, and then they still send it to like a 48-hour dry clean. So what they decided to do was actually sell the units to the costume departments of the movie industry. And so now you can imagine that if Warner Brothers has dozens of these in their back office, then anytime a movie's being shot, they finish with the costume, then they put it in the unit. 1 minute later, it's clean. You can either A, go for another shoot, or B, they can just cycle them overnight. And so they no longer have to wait. And so they ended up finding that instead of charging the consumers each time they use it, they found it's better off just to sell the units.
Yep.
That's
so then retail online, that's pretty, I think most people know what that is. So selling in like a store, on Amazon, on your own website, something like that. Original equipment manufacturer. So like, for example, a Carrier air conditioner or a Dell computer is made up of components that someone else manufactures, so that all of those little parts are the OEMs that go into it. So Dell uses a company that makes all of the chips and everything, and then they basically just assemble it and brand it as a Dell computer. And you may not know all of the companies that are making the stuff inside. You can find it if you search for it, but you just see it as a Dell computer. And then there's like the razor blade model. So if anybody's aware of, Dollar Shave Club, I think is one. The female version of that is Billy. I use that one actually. So you get the razor for like really cheap or for free in some cases, but then you have this subscription basically to getting blades sent to you on a consistent basis. A printer and the toner ink is another example of that. The printer itself is not very expensive. It's sometimes buying a whole new printer is actually cheaper than buying the ink that you need for it. But basically, it's the thing that keeps you using the product. You're buying the blades to use with the razor, the toner to go with the printer, and an espresso or a Keurig is another example of that, where you buy the machine and then you're constantly buying K-cups to use in the machine because you can't use anything else in it. Lease or consumables. So this is like heavy equipment rental is an example of this, or like leasing a car. My dad owns a transportation company, and so oftentimes it'll be just a short period of time, like 6 months, where he's doing certain kinds of jobs and needs a certain piece of heavy equipment to do it. And it doesn't make sense for him to buy it So he will lease it from this leasing company who basically rents it out to him. So they buy the equipment from somebody else and they make their money off of leasing it out to someone like my dad. Freemium, so this is like most phone games or apps, like for example, the Calm app for reducing anxiety. It's free to download, but all of the kind of useful stuff in it, if you want all the good sleep stories and stuff like that, then you have to pay either for the upgraded subscription or in games, you know, there's a lot of in-app purchases where you can buy your coins or jewels or whatever you need to get to the next level. And then subscriptions are, you know, like Peloton, Blue Apron. So Peloton, there's the actual bike itself, but you can't even use the bike without having the Peloton subscription. And you can just use the Peloton fitness app on its own without even having the bike. And then like Blue Apron delivers, you know, groceries to you on a consistent basis. So those are things like you sign up for, and to make it stop, you have to cancel it, basically. So like newspapers are the same way. Anybody have any questions about any of those revenue models, or where you think you might fit in, what your model would be, or have questions about what do we think your model should be?
My question is, I mean, can like people coexist? Because I know answering like, is your thing a platform or a network, people when they say both, it's usually not the best idea. But my question is like, can it be like, you know, taking a slice and still like operating like on a freemium model? Is that a good idea or a bad idea? I mean, like if with my condition, I mean, I'll try to give it some context. I mean, if we're trying to patch local businesses with like these organizations, we want like, you know, a piece of that transaction, or like, you know, the value that we are generating, we understand that. So can we become like a platform and like be still operating on a freemium model for like um, other people? If people want to grow their organizations, they have to buy in for that analytics bit, and the organizations who want to sell to these clubs, we get a part of that transaction. So is that a good idea as a business model, or like it's a bad strategy?
I think you can have like more than one revenue stream. So like a platform, for example, might also, you know, be able to make money off of advertising like on the app or something. So you can have more than one. As far as listing it on the business model canvas, you don't want to like list every possible way that you could make money. You want to focus on like your primary revenue stream.
But like just a follow up, people like clarity, right? And at the end of it, I mean, like, what is your business model should be like a one line answer to like, what is your business model, right? It shouldn't be convoluted, like we are doing this, we are doing that, and that's how we make our money. So that's usually not the best way to have investments around, I feel. So okay, but yeah, that makes sense though.
I think when you're like pitching to an investor, yeah, you don't want to be confusing about all the different ways that you could make money. You will say like what your primary way of gaining revenue is, and then, you know, in a conversation or later in the pitch, they might ask questions about, could you also make money by doing this? And, you know, you can say yes. Arnold, do you have any other thoughts about including more than one?
Well, my only thought was, if it's sort of a little bit complicated, you're not sure which way to go, you know, one way to do it is to put together a basic financial model of different revenue streams and say, okay, well, if I did a platform and just charge this percentage, you know, if I got 1,000 users or 100,000 users, what would that revenue look like? And contrary, it's like, okay, if we did the freemium and the other way, I got 100,000 users, what would it look like? And you can kind of model it out that way and see. But also, if you look at, are there any other, what other businesses are doing something potentially similar, or an adjacent space and which model they picked and why, then it might be more clear of, well, everyone in our space does it this way, and there's probably a reason why they do it. So you're probably better off going down that path.
I genuinely feel, I mean, going off of what you're saying is like it should be super simple. What we want to do is like treat the entire supply side as like, the same people. Like we don't care if you're a club or a local business. We want to treat you as like, a customer, and then give you that sort of visibility to like all the users that we have in the channel. So it's freemium for like, we're not charging anything for the user. Like if I'm a student, you come on Canary, no charge. It's just that as an organization, as a president, when you give us the visibility, that's when you have to pay. That's for the analytics and all of that. So that's the
Right.
supply side that we are talking about. So that's what we are thinking.
So the thing about this, the revenue model, I'll say only applies to your customers, which in my conversation with Nancy are the people who are paying you,
Paying, yeah.
not your users.
Oh yeah.
So how you acquire users is a completely different topic. It just, when you're charging your customers, how are you going to do it, and which model are you going to use?
Right.
So it sounds to me like you were thinking like the freemium model, even for like the businesses or the clubs, because they can use the service and like put their information on there like for free, but to get the analytics that you were talking about is what they would have to pay for.
Or even, I mean, like, push, like, because we are trying to get people's interests and like, what these organizations are up against. So yeah, I mean, basically, yes, give them more visibility and everything. So that you have to pay. So yeah. Okay.
Anybody else have thoughts before we move on? Questions?
Yeah, sure. I have one. So as far as the revenue models are concerned, mine falls basically under advertising and subscription. But my question is, when it comes to modeling the different subscription plans, who do you really approach in terms of interviewing to find out how much to charge for each subscription plan?
I think when you're talking to your customers, like in your customer interview, you don't want to like lead them to a price. You kind of describe the benefit that they could get from it. Ask them about their problems and say, how much would you pay for someone to solve that problem? If you were going to pay by subscription, what is the like monthly amount that you would pay? And try not giving them, don't say, would you pay 20? Would you pay 100? Because, if you only say 20 and they were willing to pay 100, like you just stopped them at 20 and you didn't find out if they were willing to pay 100.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Any other questions or thoughts? All right. All right, so I'm going to do another little poll here before we get into cost structure. So how much do you think that Nike makes on a pair of shoes? So every shoe that is purchased by you, a customer, how much do you think that they make? Like on a $70 pair of shoes. I don't know how much Nikes are. More than that, probably. Like 100.
They're like between $100 and $200.
I don't buy Nikes.
They're expensive.
All right. I think that's everybody. All right. So I will share what everyone thought. So kind of equally between $4.50 and $55.23, and nobody thought it was only $10. So let's see who was correct. $4.50 is the correct answer. So from 120 or whatever they're sold for, they only make $4.50 off of each shoe profit wise. So let's look at Nike's cost structure in order to see how they get to that $4.50. So does anybody have any idea of how the shoes are made by Nike from the materials all the way to being sold to you in a store? What do you think that value chain looks like? Where would we start?
Probably research.
After that, when you're actually making the thing, I guess we
Sourcing all the raw materials to like conjoin everything and bring it together to like, be assembled.
right. So the rubber, fabric, etc., will come from a manufacturer. So then what happens next?
I mean, there's distribution after the product is made. So distribution takes place and or like, I mean,
You're close. You're missing a step in between the manufacturing and the distribution.
Design.
So sort of the design, the assembling of it. So Nike Thailand or something is assembling them in-house, or another company might outsource it and have someone else assemble it for them. And then, like you said, distributor is next, and Nike, I think, is their own distributor. I'm not sure if they have an outsourced one, but another company might outsource the distribution of the shoes as well. And then what do you think comes after distribution?
there's marketing, there's I mean, the in-house dealers that the brick and mortar stores or online stores, that's where they're kept. So
You are correct. So the retailers, like Nike does have their own stores, but they also sell through, Finish Line, Dick's Sporting Goods, places like that. So what's important to know is it comes to you when you buy it. So everybody's going to be taking their slices out of the cost, here. So when you look at the breakdown of their costs, this big part here is the retail markup, and then all of these other costs and this little tiny profit slice. So when you say something like, okay, it costs us $10 to make our thing, so we'll sell it for $15 and then we'll have a $5 profit. You're not accounting for all of these things that take to actually sell your thing and get it into the hands of customers. So even if you're not selling through retail, you're going to have additional costs besides just what it takes you to make the thing. And even for services, you're going to have more costs than just what it costs you to make the product.
Emily, if you go back one. So I think if you imagine that we have a $200 shoe that you buy at the end user, what Emily's kind of saying is that if you buy it at Dick's Sporting Goods buys the shoe for $100 and sells it to you. But then the wholesaler or the distributor pays $50 and then sells it to Dick's Sporting for $100. And then Nike actually cost them like $20 to make or something. But when you take all the other costs, they only have a profit of $4. So the big difference is that for Nike, other than the shoes that they sell at their store, the majority of those are through brick and mortar or through distributors, in which case most of the profit goes to the distributor and the retail. They have to share that. Otherwise, it's not profitable for Dick's Sporting Goods to sell Nike shoes. It's very, very eye-opening when you figure that you have this $100 million company that sells these $100 or $200 pair of shoes, and they only make $4 or $5 per shoe.
Arnold, can you think of any good examples of like this for like service things? Like a lot of people in here are working on more service than like making a product like shoes. So obviously you wouldn't have the assembling and stuff like that, but to help them think about like breaking down their additional costs to selling.
For service, let's see. So depending if you did it in-house, like all the software development, software maintenance. So I think one thing people tend to forget is, okay, if I am making an app or a platform, it's got to work on both iOS and Android. Which one are you going to pick first? And let's say you pick Android, and guess what? Like the Samsungs just did, or you pick Apple, right? They just did their latest version upgrade, and somehow now all your things not working. And so suddenly, right, you get a call in the middle of the night because all these people can't use your app, and you need to have a software person on call, whether again it's an Android developer, an iOS developer, is it in-house, is it out? How do you do all that kind of support? And anytime you're doing a transaction too, I think another thing to think about in terms of cost is the customer support. Right? How many times have you downloaded an app or bought something, some transaction didn't work, and you're like, I just need to talk to somebody, but you can't, right? It's like, do you provide that? Do you not provide that? And I think the other thing to think about is, as we talk a little bit in the future about go-to-market, is as you get your word out, you may need to pay somebody else. This kind of goes to advertising, is if you're going to be listed somewhere else, then they're going to want a transaction or a transaction fee of that. If they listed your product on their website and you got a click through, then they're going to want to take a piece of that. You know, I actually think, sorry, one of the things I was thinking about was, is it Zach or Jackson? One of the guys who was doing the spoon. So something like that, Jackson, right? The spoon might be like yours may or may not be considered like a medical device. And so for you, you may say, okay, I'm gonna find a distributor. So who has a catalog of like medical type of products that people with disabilities buy from? And it's not free to list them in there, but okay, suddenly it's a distribution, right? They're gonna list your product in your catalog. You're gonna get hundreds of millions of people to see it, but guess what? They're gonna say, hey, I'm gonna take 50% of everything you sell. So suddenly you're, right, cost you $1 to make it. Again, you may be selling it for 10 or 20. They may be selling it for $20, right? They're gonna buy from you for $4 or $5, and they're gonna take it because they're helping you get that distribution out.
So any questions about cost structure, everything we just discussed? All right.
Quick question. So like when we discuss our product, I guess like in the business model canvas, would like software development be a cost we should like have if it's like a mobile platform kind of thing as one of our costs, as like the actual maintenance of the app, or more like direct costs like payment processing or server fees and things like that? I guess it's like, yeah, payroll. Is payroll a cost I should be thinking about when I'm doing my?
You need both. So I think there will be a fixed development cost, meaning it's going to cost me $100,000 or $50,000 to get this up and running. But that's sort of a sunk cost. But moving forward, how much does it cost to maintain? And so again, it's okay if this goes back to the. Have we talked about customer acquisition costs?
No. We're
okay.
Later.
This is something you're going to be getting to earlier, but it's at this point it's really understanding kind of your top line, how revenue is going to be generated, and then the more things you can understand about your cost, the more accurate it will be. You know what I mean? It's like there are realistically going to be 2 or 3 big drivers of your cost, and you need to help identify those. And then there's a lot of like noise and whatnot, but they're really 2 big knobs normally, and you want to make sure you have those captured.
Okay, so this is about why you should not undercut your competitors on price, like on price alone. So your value prop should not be cost dependent. Something that we hear from people a lot is, so our competitors charge $19.99, so we'll sell it for 10, which if you're thinking about it in terms of you're providing more benefit than your competitor, your customer would be willing to pay more for it, or at least the very same. So why would you sell it for less? You're kind of devaluing what you're doing by selling it for less. And also you need to keep in mind that there's a reason that your competitors chose the price that they're at. And it's likely because it's the price that they needed to sell it at in order to be profitable because of all of those costs that we just discussed. So Arnold found this quote about the Loon, which is from TechCrunch, I believe.
Yep.
One of tech's stranger moonshots is dead, as Google announced this week that Loon, its internet balloon project, is being shut down. It was an ambitious attempt to bring high-speed internet to remote corners of the world, but the team says it wasn't sustainable to provide a high-cost service at a low price, which like that last sentence is like, when people read it, it's kind of like, well, duh. But, you know, providing something at a low price when it costs you a lot to implement it just kind of doesn't make sense. So I think if you're thinking about your only way to compete with a competitor is to charge less, your value proposition probably is not as defined as it should be.
Right, if I can add, it really ties back to your value prop. So what value are you adding for your customers? And if you're really solving a painful problem that they have, they will pay potentially a lot of money to solve their big problem. And I also want to reemphasize what Emily said is that if you're doing something that's already better than their competitors, then don't think, oh, well, it's going to be better and then I can charge less. But you can actually be charging more because your value is greater.
So the homework is just to, based on everything that we talked about tonight with your revenue models and the cost structure, is to take your business model canvas that you've already made and update those bottom two boxes, the cost structure and the revenue streams. They should be more defined after you've thought this through, or after you think this through a little bit more after the workshop. So feel free to submit that to the BMC mailbox, or even in our next workshop, we can spend a little bit of time at the beginning of it talking through revenue streams after you've thought about them a little bit more. And so our next workshop will be in 2 weeks, and that will be about the go-to-market strategy and how to reach your customers, which we alluded a couple of times tonight about to the customer roles. So end users versus the payer. There's also a few other types like influencers, saboteurs, things like that. So that's what we'll be talking about next time. So any questions at this point? I see something.
I had a quick question on this cost stuff we were just talking about. Is it worth highlighting, for example, like the development, like so mine would be a mobile app. If I were to develop that, like I guess in-house by the team, is that like something worth highlighting as a cost reducing thing in the beginning if it's going to be developed by the team members?
I think if you have the skill set to do it in-house, and you don't necessarily need to.
Yeah, so so would that be something worth highlighting to the, I guess, like the judges, as it's a cost reducing, I don't know, kind of.
Like you don't have to pay to outsource it to somebody else.
No, because I think not as much, because what they're really looking for is, what's your long-term, what does it look like long-term and how you're making money. So kind of like the long-term, I think they would be looking at, for every transaction, what does your revenue look like versus your cost? So like you said, okay, if you already know roughly the web services and the cloud, that's going to cost $1, and I make $2. Okay, then I make $1 transactions. Like, okay, I don't know if they would consider that reasonable or not, but it depends on how many transactions you're going to have. But maybe if the revenue is $20 and it only costs you 10 cents, that's pretty good, right? Your fixed costs are really low.
I had one more bigger picture question real quick. I don't know if we're gonna get into this a little later about what the exact deliverables are, but like how much focus should be on like ability to execute versus all the business model stuff we've been focusing on thus far.
Right. So it's a business model competition, like for a reason. Like it's really more about finding that product market fit and like proving that there is this problem. People are willing to pay to solve it. Like this is how big the opportunity is. Like we can solve this problem better than existing solutions, basically. So like you don't have to have any kind of prototype or anything developed at that point. It's really just about proving that the problem exists and that it's big enough people will pay to solve it. You want to add to that, Arnold? You look like you're thinking.
Yeah, what I was thinking about was you would get, much more favorable scores if you've talked to more customers who validate your problem and say, if you can say, Joe, I've interviewed 50 people and 30 of them said, we would definitely use this. I've talked to, 50 residents around Ross-Ade and they all said, I would totally sign up for this. Then it would be for you to have a wire mock-up of your platform, right? It's all about validating the problem. And the more people you talk to, the more you validate it, the better you'll do. Again, I think kind of like the ability to execute is downstream. It's okay. Now, when you're talking to your first angel investor, they're going to judge it based on execution. But for this competition, it's really framing what Emily said, the business model canvas. Have you validated it? Do you understand what's going on? And does it make sense?
And that's kind of like why we harp on the whole customer interview thing so much, is because that's exactly what the judges are going to be looking for when they're judging all of your submissions or talking to you, is finding out if you have talked to your customers and what they said about it, and knowing that you're not just making all these assumptions. You've actually gone out and validated or invalidated those assumptions that you had. So that's why having more customer interviews just validates what you're doing even more. It's basically your backup. It's your research to prove your point.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We might wrap up a couple of minutes early. All right. And just so everybody knows, I'm still doing office hours through the end of the competition. So Thursdays and Fridays, I think some of them are taken up. I think most of this week is already taken up, but feel free if you ever have any questions, you're stuck, or you just want to get feedback like we've been doing tonight, feel free to set up an office hours with me. And that link is on the Prolent page, I think, or at least on our website somewhere. Where did it?
It's on our Instagram too.
On our Instagram as well. It's a lot of places. All right, well, thanks for engaging so much tonight. We actually had conversations. I enjoyed that. So everybody have a good rest of your night.